Okay, it's 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. My name is Desiree Narengo, and I am a Smith Fellow from the new 2020 cohort. And this is a pre-proposal webinar for the David H. Smith Conservation Research Fellowship Program. Every year, when we put out the call for applicants, our fellows are often contacted by folks who are interested in the fellowship or want more information or would like some advice. And in the interest of sharing this information more broadly, more inclusively, and more equitably, we decided to hold this webinar for the first time this year so that more people have access to this information. So today we have a little over 130 people on this call right now, which is really exciting to see this kind of turnout. And I also want to let you know that this webinar is going to be recorded so that we can share this information with people who are unable to make it during this time. So we got about 60 minutes to do this webinar. And so our goal today is to really share details about what the mission of this program really is, as well as describe the many benefits of being a Smith Fellow. And we hope that this webinar will give you some more additional insight that will help you as you prepare your applications. To give you an idea of the overview, first we have the Smith Fellows Program Director, Shonda Gillian Foster, is going to give a brief overview of the Smith Fellowship Program and give you some essential details about the application process. Next, we're going to have a panel of some fellows from the last 13 years who are going to introduce themselves and their projects and give a little bit, maybe a tip or their favorite part about the program. We also have a series of frequently asked questions that the fellows will answer. And then finally, in the last 20 minutes or so, we'll have an open Q&A from our audience so that you have an opportunity to ask our panel of fellows questions that you have on your mind. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I'm happy to introduce the Smith Fellow Program Director, Shonda Gillian Foster. And let me change this.
Thanks, Desiree.
I'm going to turn my screen off so you can put yours on.
Okay, great. Thank you. Oh no. I'm doing this in Chrome for the first time. So now it's making me do some privacy settings. My apologies.
We're going to go over a lot of different information during this webinar. And so you may have questions that come up that you want to ask that we might go over. So about 5 minutes before our Q&A period, I'm going to ask people to submit them in the chat. So as we go, you can think about your questions during the time.
Apologies for that. Can everyone see my screen there?
Yep.
Great. Perfect. So like Desiree said, my name is Shonda. I'm the program director for the Smith Fellowship. And I will start with the caveat that there is a ton of information on the Smith Fellows website. And my goal isn't necessarily to go over a lot of that information, although I will do some highlights in a hopefully organized fashion. Really, the goal is to cover what's not on the website and to dive into some of the details that perhaps aren't as readily available with the information that is on there. And so for the next, why? It's not letting me advance my slides. There we go. Okay. And so my goal in the next 12 minutes or so is to go over what is the Smith Fellowship and a little history of the program, the eligibility criteria, the application process, including some updates this year, given that we're in pandemic times, and the selection process and the evaluation criteria. And so the Smith Fellows program was founded in 1999. Since then, it has supported 100 fellows over 21 cohorts. And so in this request for proposals, we will be selecting fellows number 101 through 105 for the 2021 cohort. This picture's from the 2014 reunion, so you have to imagine another at least 30 awesome people photoshopped in here. But they represent a broad range of disciplines and areas of expertise. There are not only biologists and ecologists, but there have been social scientists, engineers, toxicologists, veterinarians, and we didn't have a lawyer coming into the Smith Fellows program, but we have had a lawyer now coming out of the Smith Fellows program. And you can imagine since 1999, there are a vast variety of career levels and career trajectories. And so lots of fellows are in academia, although there are a number also in federal and state agencies and NGOs. And so the program is funded by the Cedar Tree Foundation. This is the family foundation of Dr. David Smith. David Smith was a pediatrician. He innovated the spinal meningitis vaccine. And after that success, conservation was really his second love. He spotted, though, the same disconnect between research and application in conservation as he did in medicine. And so the Cedar Tree Foundation and the Smith Fellows program specifically was created to address that issue with the goal of bridging that gap between research and application. Since 2005, the Smith Fellows program has been administered by the Society for Conservation Biology, and it was at about that same time that both myself and the executive director, Mike Dombeck, came on board, and so that's us. I am based at the Society for Conservation Biology's executive office here in Washington, D.C. Mike long ago escaped D.C. And operates mostly out of northern Wisconsin, but he brings a wealth of experience in conservation and science and policy, particularly given his incredible career. And I will say that he tells incredible and amazing campfire stories. And Mike, if you are on this call, hi to Mike. The mission of the Smith Fellows program really covers all of the basics. It's a 2-year postdoc. It provides funding for individual research projects, as well as training programs, peer networking, and field learning experiences. Most of those happening at the retreats that we hold 3 times a year. Working with practitioners is incorporated directly into the mission, and I'll talk a little bit more about the mentoring component in a little bit. And finally, it's expected of Smith Fellows that they're not only going to do good science, they're going to communicate it as well. And the research will be problem solving and solutions oriented. The fellowship provides 2 years of salary, as well as research funds totaling $40,000 over the 2 years. The research funds are essentially interchangeable, recognizing that there are going to be big differences in projects. Some might be more travel heavy than others. Some projects might require really expensive equipment or tests, or for some projects, it might make sense to hire a number of assistants. Those research funds can be used for any of those things. The targeted professional development workshops and training events, like I said, usually happen at these retreats, which happen 3 times a year for a week at a time. And at those retreats, we have a number of workshops that we hold every 2 years to make sure that each cohort of fellows receives them. And those are things like workshops that are focused on communications, like storytelling or media training. We biannually do a federal policy workshop in Washington, D.C. We focused on environmental grant making, and there have been a number of diversity, equity, and inclusion related workshops. All that being said, there is a lot of space reserved for fellows to provide input on what sort of workshops they would like to do as well. And then finally, because the program is administered by the Society for Conservation Biology, the fellowship also provides lifetime memberships to SCB for each of the fellows, as well as access to the Society's journals. For eligibility, again, it's a postdoc, and so a PhD or whatever the doctoral equivalent is, thinking of something like veterinary science, is required. And early career is defined as within 5 years of having obtained this. So for this request for proposals, it would be necessary for an applicant not to have received their PhD prior to 2015. And if the PhD is still in the works, it would need to be finished by September 2021, which is the latest possible start date. It's not limited to US citizens. Anyone in the globe can apply. It's not limited to the US geographically. The Smith Fellows program has supported research projects that were global in scope or just had elements that were taking place outside of the US. The one requirement is that it must have some relevance to conservation as it's practiced in the US, and that should be made explicit in the research proposal itself. And then the funding must be administered by a US institution. That's just a requirement of the funder. And then finally, no topic or methodology is targeted. It's not a targeted request for proposals looking for one specific topic or one specific way of doing things. I have a number of folks get in touch with me every year and say, well, I'm thinking about doing something like this. I've never seen, another fellow doing a project like this. Does this really fit? And to that, I almost always say, absolutely. In fact, I think it's more interesting to the program at this point if there are potential topics or ways of doing things that haven't been done before. And so the most details about the application process can be found on our website at the proposal guidelines page, and that's found by clicking on the apply button over there on the right. All of the details can be found there, including all of the pieces of the proposal package. And the big announcement this year is that we have put off the deadline until October 2nd, 2020. I think given current times, everyone could use a number of weeks of breathing space, including myself, as we gear up to do this selection process again. This is a list of the items that comprise a Smith Fellowship proposal package. The first 5 are really connected to the applicant themselves, and then everything else are supplemental materials provided by other individuals. And so first, there's a cover letter. A lot of folks ask about a page limit for that. There's none specified, but I would highly recommend keeping it no more than 2 pages. And then the title page and research plan. The title page will list out the Fellows mentor team and contact information. And then the research plan, there is an 8-page limit, not including that title page on that. And the research plan will cover the background, the questions that are being asked, the proposed methods, a timeline, and then especially the application and relevance to conservation. And then the applicant's CV is required. That's long form. And then finally, a personal statement from the applicant. And these will be short paragraph answers to 4 questions this year. We've added a 4th question that gets at any sort of COVID-related scenarios that the potential fellow has thought about given our current times. But I just really want to emphasize that the personal statement is a really important part of the proposal package. It really gets at explicitly the evaluation criteria that the Smith Fellows program is looking for. And I personally find them really, really helpful when reviewing applications. So I recommend spending some time with that. So those are the parts of the application that are particular to the candidate. Everything else comes from other individuals as supplementary materials. And so this year we've made a number of changes to try to alleviate a bit of the administrative burden. And so as far as letters are concerned, we are requiring just 2 instead of 3 letters of reference, and then just 1 letter each from the primary academic mentor and primary practitioner mentor. And I'll get at kind of the difference between those 2 mentors in a second, as well as the mentor's CV. And those are the 2-page NSF style CVs, not the long form. And then in the past, we've required of all applicants a waiver of indirect costs. The Smith Fellows program provides up to 5% of indirect costs to the host institution. And because that's really not needed to review proposals, we are going to hold off on that and not ask that until we get to the finalist stage of the selection process. And then the Smith Fellows program has an online platform. This is the 3rd year that we've used it. It's at apply.smithfellows.org. It's really intuitive. It's been really helpful for me to have this, but you go to this website, you create an account, and then you'll answer a number of questions and have the opportunity to upload all of the various materials into the system. And like I said, it's quite intuitive. There's just one big difference that I want to point out in how letters are submitted. And so because reference letters generally do not get submitted to the applicant, the system allows you to enter in the referee's name and email address, and then it will send an email to the letter writer with a unique URL for them to follow. And it's that way that they can upload their reference letter for an applicant without the applicant ever having seen that letter. And then for the mentor letters, both the academic and the conservation practitioner, it can either be done that way, which is totally fine, or it is not uncommon for mentors to provide their support letters to the applicants, and then the applicant can then just upload that information themselves. So either way is totally fine. And as I mentioned, I often get questions about, what really differentiates an academic mentor from a practitioner mentor, and this mentor is housed at this institution, and do they qualify? Generally, academic mentors are usually found at universities, but not always. And the goal of the academic mentor is to really be on the science, the science integrity side of the research, and to help the fellow think through the particular methods and questions that are being asked. And then the practitioner mentor, while not always, is generally found at either an agency or an NGO. And they help the fellow really think through the applied nature of the research and how to make sure the results will inform or influence management or policy. And the goal is really to have the fellow get a good working relationship with wherever that practitioner institution is. And fellows can be administratively based at either the academic institution or the practitioner mentors institution. And we frequently encourage applicants to consider being based at the practitioner mentor institution. Coming off a PhD, fellows are quite familiar with the academic world. And one of the goals of the Smith Fellowship is for the fellows to become way more familiar with the practitioner world. And these are just some of the institutions that fellows have been partnered with in the past several years. And so you can see there's a number of federal agencies, a number of the really big conservation NGOs, some smaller conservation NGOs, some state agencies, but really there's no boundaries on this. And so if the individual that you are looking to work with fulfills kind of those goals that I put out there about the practitioner mentor, there's no reason why whatever institution they're based at would not be a good potential fit. And then I want to go over the selection process. This is a really big one. This might even be new for some of the fellows because it's not widely advertised in detail. And so I wanted to make sure we covered all of that. And so I'm going to walk through the timeline. It's about 4 to 5 months long on how we go from, in the past couple of years, 120 to 130 proposals down to the 5 fellows that comprise the cohort at the end of the process. It's 4 steps. And so, like I said, the due date this year is in early October. Almost immediately, all of those proposals will be sent out for peer review. And so we require a large number of volunteer reviewers because each proposal is reviewed by 3 individuals. And so I often joke with the fellows that by the end of the entire selection process, at least 20 people have probably seen their proposal. So in the first stage, we go from the top 120 or so down to the top 20, and that takes about a month to do. And then the second step, we would have a selection panel. In the past, that's taken place in person in DC. That's not likely to happen this year. But that's a panel of about 8 to 10 scientists who read all of the top 20 and then narrow it down to the top 12. The top 12 receive phone interviews. That'll likely happen in mid-December this year. These are short 15-minute interviews where all of the candidates are asked the same 4 questions. And we use those to determine the top 8 candidates who will be invited for in-person interviews. Those will likely take place in late January or early February this year. And those interviews are a half day long for each candidate. There are 2 panels of 4 to 5 interviewers. And so the candidates are interviewed once by each panel. And then those interviews culminate with the selection of 5 fellows to be awarded. And then the fellowship can be started anytime between March and September 2021 at the fellow's discretion. But when we're doing this very rigorous 4-step selection process, what are all of these reviewers actually looking for? And so obviously the research project itself is a big part of it. And we're looking at, is this research cutting edge? Is it novel? Has it ever been done before? Is it broadly applicable? Is there big management or policy implications that are integrated into the project itself? And then we're also looking at the candidates' qualifications. Do they have a unique story or experience? Have they demonstrated leadership? Are they a good communicator and collaborator? And I emphasize this all the time, that the qualifications of the candidate are equally, if not more important than the quality of the research. The research can always be improved upon, and we frequently provide the selected fellows with suggested changes or suggested additions to their mentor team, because really, in the grand scheme of things, we look at this as a shorter term investment in a research project, but really it's a long-term investment in the fellow themselves, in their professional skill development and individual career success, as well as their contribution to the existing fellowship community. Or everyone loves a Venn diagram. I scrolled past this one day and I thought to myself, well, if that's not a Smith Fellow, I don't know what is. And so the goal of this selection process is to find that sweet spot in the middle, the individuals who have really big ideas, the motivation to put them into action, and maybe make and bring some friends along for the ride. And then lastly, we throw around the word leadership a lot, and there are many definitions. I like this one. It was introduced to me by one of the Smith Fellows, Maureen Ryan. And the reason I like it is because, it says anyone can be a leader. It's not limited to those people in high positions of authority or at the pinnacle of their career. It is really putting out there that leadership is an action. It's not a role. And so in that spirit, I want to thank the fellows who are really the ones that were responsible for saying, hey, the Smith Fellows program application and selection process is a bit murky, and maybe we should do something to make it more transparent and accessible to all of the applicants. So I thank them for their leadership on this, and I will turn it over to them. But this is where you can find me. I am easily found and accessible via social media or my email address, and always happy to answer questions as candidates are navigating the application process. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Shonda. So again, if you have any questions for Shonda, you can submit them to the chat later on and she can answer them for you. But now we're just going to do some very brief introductions of the fellows that are on the call today. And so if you could just give your name, a little bit about your research, favorite part of the Smith Fellowship Program, or one tip, that would be great. So Jed, can you start for us?
I would be happy to. So my name is Jedediah Brody. I'm from the class of 2007, which makes me feel so old, although honestly, the fellowship seems super recent to me. I did my project on elk and aspen in Yellowstone, so hence the picture up there in the upper right. But both before that and since that, most of my work has been tropical. So now I'm almost entirely tropical rainforest guy, and I do landscape connectivity habitat corridors for things like this clouded leopard right here. Climate change, I still have a climate change project in Alaska. So, if you're interested in any of those topics, I'd love to chat with you more about them, so get in touch. And then the Smith Fellowship, I just have to say, is amazing. It's probably the coolest thing, at least professionally, that I've ever done. So if you're listening to this and if you're at all interested in applying, I really strongly encourage you to apply to this. It's an amazing program. And it's amazing because it's so much more than just cool research project proposal, here's a check. It's all about the extras. It's all about it's becoming part of a family. The training sessions at the meetings 3 times a year are great. I learned a ton about how to talk to the media, how to give interviews, how to write for lay audiences, how to meet with politicians, all these kinds of things. But then even more than that, it is truly becoming a family. You're joining this huge network of 100+ other fellows that you could know or get in touch with or ask advice from for the rest of your life. So it's a phenomenal program. And again, if you have any more questions or would like to chat with me, please shoot me an email.
Thanks for that. So next we have Kim. Kim, are you on the call? Oh, we're missing Kim. Hopefully she gets on, but we're going to move forward, and I'll come if she's able to speak with us. Next, we have Molly. Molly, can you give us an introduction?
Yeah, hi, I'm Molly. I'm a 2017 fellow, and my Smith project was focused on salamanders, deadly skin pathogens, and what we could do about it. There's a pathogen called B-Sal that has devastated populations of salamanders in Europe, but this pathogen is absent in the US. And so we have sort of this rare opportunity to be proactive instead of reactive, as conservation often is. The US is a biodiversity hotspot for salamanders. And so my research was focused on proactively understanding risk across the landscape and also developing disease mitigation tactics and tools that managers can use on the ground to actually prevent declines of salamanders within the US. And I echo what Jedediah was saying about the awesomeness of the Smith Fellowship. It's just, there's so many amazing aspects. And I think in reflecting on it over as in preparation for this, I think one thing that I loved was just the ability to be flexible and take risks in your research and explore new opportunities. You're not confined to this thing that you set up in your proposal, and you can sort of step out of that and take on new opportunities. And for example, I was able to do sort of mini work stays. I don't know what else to call them, but just for a week or two, go visit different state managers and federal agency staff. And that has sort of turned into lasting collaborations, has made me better understand how my research and expertise can fit into conservation on the ground, and also just give you a window into what the career opportunities are in those agencies. And I will leave it at that.
Awesome, thank you. Hey, Kimberly, I saw you hopped on. Are you able to speak?
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, we can. Can you go ahead and give a little intro?
Yes, I'm Kim Terrell. I'm from the 2011 cohort, and I'm here to prove that even the technologically challenged can become a Smith Fellow. Thank you for your patience. And so I also kind of represent a very circuitous career path. I'm now at the Tulane Environmental Law Clinic doing environmental justice advocacy work, but my background is in wildlife physiology, and my Smith Fellowship focused on understanding amphibian physiology in the context of conservation and climate change. And that's a hellbender on the screen for anyone who doesn't know.
Oh, are you still there?
Yes, did I lose you? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it just did a funny noise.
Oh, interesting, okay. But yeah, I don't know. I'm happy to answer questions. I don't know if you want more detail about my work, or if you caught everything I just said, but I appreciate you guys' patience.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kim. So the next person that is going to be on here is my partner in webinar crime, Caitlin, but we're having some audio issues, so I'm just going to give a little description about her research. So she's a member of the class of 2017. And she completed her fellowship at the University of Maine with Jacqueline Gill, and her practitioner mentor was Abe Miller-Rushing at Acadia National Park. And she says that it was a little weird in that Acadia was also the home of her PhD certificate work, and that Abe had also been on her dissertation committee. However, she felt like her Smith project was a real departure from her PhD, and it helped her to shift from ecology and climate change vulnerability assessment research to a Smith project that really explored the paleoecological perspective of alpine and subalpine plant communities. And her hot tip for anybody interested in applying is to really get out of your academic bubble and think about where your skills and perspectives can add real value. And it doesn't hurt to plan to work in a beautiful place and to budget your research funds so that you can boat around alpine lakes. That's a really good piece of advice right there. So next up we have Max Lambert.
Hey all, so I'm Max Lambert. I'm a 2019 cohort, so still an active Smith Fellow. My research is predominantly focused on urban areas. I work right now as part of my fellowship on urban stormwater ponds. They're created to really get rid of floodwater off of urban areas, create some new habitat. The kind of conundrum of these stormwater ponds, though, is they concentrate pollutants in them. And so we're using kind of these small cages that are in these ponds to test how well threatened amphibians can survive in these contaminated urban environments, and whether we can actually use knowledge of this experiments to actually translocate more amphibians into the city and create hopefully hundreds of more populations. And do a lot of work also in California on endangered turtles in urban and agricultural landscapes. I really enjoy the Smith Fellowship because I had a chance to actually work with my conservation practitioners who work for the city of Gresham and city of Portland, Oregon, who also work now for the state of Colorado as a state agency. And I think one of the very unique and special things to me about the Smith Fellowship, besides just the amazing people, amazing opportunities for professional development, is the fact that it's a program explicitly designated towards branching out of your academic bubble and thinking about how your knowledge and insight can actually inform conservation practice, that it really encourages you to work with conservation practitioners. And to that end, my actually big piece of advice would be to spend time now early on in your application process talking to your possible conservation practitioner and really understanding where you might have some synergy with them and help them work with you to guide the actual proposal development and implementation.
Awesome. Thank you. So the last person that was going to be on the panel today is Ed Gallo. And unfortunately, I don't think that he's on the call. We don't have his audio right now, but I just really wanted to highlight him and share his contact information with you here, because he has a really great project that's really combining ecology of migratory birds as well as political science and policy to try to understand how we can actually implement the management action that we want to take to conserve these birds. And so he's a really great example of someone that's kind of stepping out of the traditional ecology conservation bubble. And there's his contact information if you'd like to get in touch with him if you have any questions as well. And so now, in the interest of time, we're going to hop right to the frequently asked questions. And for all the panelists that are on right now, I'm going to propose a question to you, and if you could just give us a brief answer, that would be great. So first up, we have a question for Molly. Molly, if you're on, one of the questions we get is, what kind of advice would you have for how to find a mentor? And do you have to be in the same location?
Yeah, so I'll just tell a little bit about how I sort of found my mentors. And my academic mentor was someone who I had worked with in the past, and I got connected through during my PhD, and we had discussed the opportunities of postdocs. And so when I found out about the Smiths, it seemed like a logical connection given his expertise and our discussions before. I don't think it always has to work that way. I think it's also good to sort of branch out of the bubble that you've existed in and find new academic connections. And on the practitioner side, I went about it sort of from the perspective of thinking about the questions that we're interested in, like what agencies or conservation organizations or different federal groups would be most helpful for making sure that our questions are applicable to on-the-ground conservation. And that's what connected me to my practitioner mentor, which was the Association for Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and Priya Nanjappa, who has now moved on. But that basically gave me this network of connections across multiple states in the eastern US, which was really helpful for implementing sort of the larger scale conservation picture of the salamander work I was doing. And in terms of being based, I don't think other than at retreats and a few meetings, ever saw my practitioner mentor other than virtually. So we were very separated, but I was based at the same institution as my academic mentor. But I think all fellows, that comes in different shapes and forms of being based at either of the mentors, or you can also be based in a completely different location based on what works for you. And for your research.
Awesome, thank you. So next up, hey, Kimberly, if you're on the call, our question to you is, what part of the application is most important and what makes a competitive CV?
Okay, can you hear me okay? Just making sure.
Yes, we can.
So when I applied as a Smith Fellow, I guess I felt like the most important part of the application was demonstrating relevance to conservation, you know, within the proposal itself, but then within those kind of separate statements. I've also been on the other side and have reviewed applications in that first round. And I'll say that the places I start are with the cover letter and the recommendation letters. And by the time I've gotten through those, I have a pretty good sense of kind of, you know, where the proposal falls. I certainly pay attention to all pieces of it, but I think the cover letter is your opportunity to sort of synthesize all these different pieces of critical information that are in different places in the application. And it's also your opportunity to illustrate that you can communicate effectively, concisely, and in a compelling way. So, you know, a lot of times I think by the time you finish the application, the cover letter is the last thing and you're sort of mentally exhausted, but definitely set aside the time to focus on that. With respect to the CV, when I review, and again, this is one perspective, but I'm, you know, when I look at publications, I'm just looking for red flags, right? Like, you're not going to convince me by the number of publications that you have that you're a competitive fellow. I'm mostly looking for evidence of leadership, evidence for somebody who, like Shonda said, should be invested in as a person, right? Above and beyond the research. And I'm also recognizing that people come from different places, and some people have fewer opportunities for publication than others. Some people have had less effective mentorship experiences than others. And so I'm looking for, you know, kind of the whole picture, and especially non-traditional examples of leadership in academia.
Perfect. Thanks for that info. So our next question is for Jedediah. What do you think makes a strong research proposal? And do you have advice for folks that are unsure how to add a conservation angle to their traditional research?
Yeah, so the conservation angle is clearly critical for this application. What makes the research proposal strong in some ways is much like what makes any research proposal strong. The ideas have to be novel and well thought out, and then you've got to present really clearly. Your writing has to be really clear about what it is you want to do, why it's very important, why it's novel, and how you can do it. And so the linkages between your methods and your questions have to be super strong. That's the case for any proposal, right? But what makes the Smith proposal different is then this added linkage of having the question and the methods have to be super tightly linked to some kind of on-the-ground applicability. And so what I recommend there, kind of what along the lines of what Kim just said, is don't leave that part to the end. Don't think, oh, I'm going to write the research proposal, and then at the end I'll think about how to act on it. Think about it from the get-go as an entire package. What am I going to do that's interesting and novel and feasible and can make a difference on the ground? And how can I do that? Who can I work with? So you're bringing in your team, your practitioner mentor at the same time as you're kind of developing the ideas for the research and the academic angle. So that's the advice I have there. The last thing I want to say is, again, related to what Kim just said. If you don't, I don't think I had any publications, maybe one or two super minor ones, but when I applied for the fellowship, don't let that stop you. The people evaluating the fellowship are looking for potential. They want to find people that they can train into future leaders. So if you don't have a lot of pubs right now, don't worry about it. Don't let that stop you from applying. Okay, I'm out.
Great. Thank you for that. So the next question we have, Caitlin was going to answer this, but I'll go ahead and answer it for her since she's not on the audio, is I get this question of, do you have to identify as a conservationist in order to apply? And my answer to that for everyone on the call is really, the answer is no, in that if your work has some aspect that's relevant to conservation from any kind of discipline, social science, veterinary science, economics, political science, if it has relevance to conservation, then you are a good fit to apply to this program. So don't think just because your work may not fit into a traditional sort of conservation ecology that this fellowship doesn't apply for you. You should definitely apply and think about how your work can really broaden the diversity of disciplines that are contributing to conservation. And then next question is for Max. What is it like to be a Smith Fellow? And really, what are the retreats like? And I really want to know because I haven't been to one yet.
Both are great questions. I'm not sure there's a singular answer to what it's like to be a Smith Fellow. I think everyone's journey is remarkably different and distinct. I think part of that is the result of the flexibility given to you by the fellowship. I can speak a little bit to my fellowship and how it's worked out. I've lucked out to have extraordinary flexibility. I live in Berkeley. I do a lot of work in Washington State and Oregon. I get to drive up there all the time. I stay with my mentor who works for the city of Portland Parks and Recreation. And through her, I've networked with a ton of people who work at the city, the regional, the state, and federal level to kind of work on this big integrative sort of interdisciplinary project, super collaborative. I think collaboration is really one of the big things that it's like to be a Smith Fellow and figure out how to collaborate among academic institutions and various applied conservationists. And yeah, I think that really defines to me what it's like to be a Smith Fellow. It's just a lot of fun. It's a lot of collaboration. It's a lot of independence and flexibility, and really thinking in very big new ways about what your research means for creating new ideas and giving them some clout, but also in terms of like turning those ideas and the data you collect into something tangible and useful. As to the retreats, they are extraordinarily fun, extraordinarily exhausting, extraordinarily invigorating. They are week-long events that are lots of social time, lots of networking with current and past fellows. They also have a remarkable mix of professional development. So we have some folks who are just skilled experts in teaching you how to tell stories, how to communicate with the media, and those are exhausting several days at a time of just back-to-back-to-back trials of figuring out how to tell a story meaningfully and excitingly. And how to communicate that to a diverse set of audiences. And so, for instance, my first retreat, we just met everyone and we were jumping into how to tell stories. So we were creating 5-minute talks within minutes of really meeting people, which was great, but just something very challenging. But the end of the retreats are always the same. You always feel invigorated to go back to your work, to keep collaborating with Smith Fellows. Brand new projects come out of these retreats and new ways of approaching your own work. So there's a lot of fun. And they're always somewhere unique, anywhere from rural Iowa to Hawaii to DC and Santa Barbara. We've kind of been all over the place for these retreats. They're just fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, Max. And the last question is for Ed. Are you on the call now, Ed?
I believe I am.
Oh, awesome. I'm so glad you're
Great.
here. If you can give us a brief idea of who you are, and answer the question of what are the interviews like?
Okay, great. Thank you. That's a very difficult one. Sorry, I was still trying to learn the 100 different applications to communicate during the pandemic, and for some reason I joined earlier on, but I wasn't able to actively speak. So I'm part of the 2020 cohort, and as Desiree introduced me, I'm going to be working at the University of Washington. And basically, as for the interviews, all what I can tell you is that what are they like? I would say they are very stressful. So that means be very well prepared. That doesn't mean that they are intimidating. The atmosphere is incredibly friendly, and everybody is incredibly supportive, very sympathetic. Nobody's trying to grill you in any ways. Everybody is just trying to get the most out of you in order to understand your suitability as a candidate for the program. So the whole operation, I would say, is incredibly well organized from the program's end, and I think that helps a lot to ease some of that stress. But by all means, all what I would have to say is if you have already had the opportunity of going through hiring processes with any employers, I would say they are not very different in the way that at the end of the day, what the interviews are about, it's about finding the best fit for the program. It's not finding about the best at something in particular, it's about finding the best fit for the program. That's what I believe. And in doing so, I would just suggest and encourage everyone to believe that if you have made it to that very last stage, you have a very, very high chance. And all what I would say is do not be too concerned about what the other ones are like, whether the competition is is harsh or not. Just focus on yourself, on being absolutely true, on being absolutely honest, passionate about what you do, why you want to do it, and just leave it to the gods to decide what is going to happen to you. But just try to make sure that you are structured, that you go into the interview with some thematic structuring of your thoughts about how you could potentially answer some of the questions. And I would say I would leave it like that for now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Great insight, Ed. Thank you. So now we have about a little less than 15 minutes where we can have an open Q&A. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and submit them in the chat, and we will present as many as we can to the panelists. So for those of you that are on audio on the call right now, feel free to speak up and answer these questions. So the first ones that I see here in the chat have to do with mentors. So the question is, can a professor at a university be an academic mentor? And are we limited to just 2? Anyone?
I can chime in there. You are not limited to 2. You can have as many as you want. I guess within reason. That might be a question for Shonda, but whoever makes you have a successful team to help support you and work towards your objectives. And there was about academic mentors can be based. They are typically based at, I think, academic university institutions, but it could also be the Smithsonian or USGS if it's a more research-focused individual at those places. Somebody else can add.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is I have 4 mentors, which is probably a lot, 2 academic and 2 practitioners, and they all serve very distinct roles, which is why I have 4, but that's probably the upper limit of what you want to start doing.
Great. The next question has to do with international field research. So do both academic and practitioner mentors need to be based at a U.S. institution? And can you also let me know if field sites are outside the U.S.? Who here does international work?
I'm happy to help if that's okay.
Yes, please do.
So my work hasn't commenced yet, but I do include my field work basically is all over the world because I'm going to be comparing international frameworks for conserving migratory birds in all continents, which means that I'm going to be spending, hopefully, if conditions permit, spending some time overseas in various places interviewing people. So they can definitely be outside the US. And some of my mentors are not based in the US. So my core team, which are basically my academic mentor and my conservation practice mentor, are both based in the US, but I have 3 additional ones that are scattered throughout the world. They don't necessarily need to be all based in the US, and the fieldwork can be outside the US, so long, I believe, you still are able to demonstrate that relevance to advancing conservation within the US.
Yes, that last point is especially important, and you can interpret that in many ways. If you can find a way that your research, even if it's international, has relevancy to the conservation that's happening in the US, then it's absolutely appropriate for this fellowship. The next question is, does anybody have some advice on how they narrow down their project for the fellowship application when there's so many amazing things that we could potentially study?
I think the piece of advice I can give is really to engage with your mentors as early as possible in this process. I think once you start chatting with both your practitioner and your academic mentors, they're going to be able to help you figure out what's probably the most tantalizing and appealing thing to really put forward, and that you can all work on, and that can help you advise on. I think that's probably one of the easiest ways to kind of streamline. And it helped me cut down a lot of my projects to something that was feasible but also ambitious.
And
Anybody else?
Yeah, this is Kim. Let me add to that. For me, the Smith Fellowship was an opportunity to kind of change my research trajectory. My PhD had been really interesting, but I felt like it was not relevant to conservation. And I wanted to work in a new study system and kind of use some skills I had to ask new types of questions in a totally different ecosystem with different study systems. And so I think, like, also keep in mind that this is an opportunity to set yourself up for a future career going in that direction. So think strategically and think about, what you want to be doing beyond a potential Smith Fellowship. And also keep in mind that sometimes if you can get your mentors excited enough about this project, even if you don't get the Smith Fellowship, I know people who have interviewed and not gotten the fellowship and end up getting a postdoc at Harvard University, for example, because the project was so compelling and so exciting that the mentors found other funding sources because they wanted to see it happen. So think of it also as an opportunity to build strategic relationships and develop a project that has potential beyond this single application.
Awesome. Next question has to do with the research project. So can you have a current postdoc mentor or PhD advisor as a mentor as long as the research is different? And bridging from that, can you propose projects that are advancing what you already did for your PhD work?
I can chime in on, I did similar amphibian work for my PhD and transitioned sort of locationally and somewhat to a different pathogen, I guess, but I did have some overlap. And I think the critical thing is that you're expanding what you would learn. And so if there's something within that project that's novel for you, even if it's maybe within the same cistern and the same conceptual framework, that you think about what new skills, new connections, new experiences you're going to gain, and I guess tying that back into sort of making sure it has that conservation and on the ground angle that's so important for the Smith, and not solely based on just ecological questions that fill knowledge gaps and that kind of thing. I don't think I answered all of the pieces of that, but
yeah, that was a great answer. I can build on that too, in that what I proposed for my Smith Fellowship this year was I had some conceptual work that I did during my PhD, and I said, well, this could be relevant in the field, but we haven't actually tested it yet. And so that's exactly what I wrote in my proposal, is that we think this is going on, but no one's collected the data for it yet. And it's inspired almost wholly from work that I did for my PhD. And I just proposed to advance that idea in a different system and in a different location with different organisms. So the next question here is, in terms of applied outcomes, would projects that develop tools or methods for conservation be relevant, or should we explicitly target quantifiable outcomes that will be accomplished during the fellowship? So I think this question is really asking about how different tools and methods in the project fit into your proposal. Is that a valuable component to include?
I can start, and I'm sure everyone else has thoughts on this as well. I think my first response to this is it's only a 2-year fellowship, so the chance to get something super duper concrete done, that time frame is going to be very limited as far as conservation outcomes. Doesn't mean you can't do that, but I think a tool, a method are all great outcomes you can give. I think as long as you're able to articulate your vision for how this will inform and advance conservation, that's really what you want to put forward. Part of my proposal, for instance, and the cover letter and the application itself talked about spending these 2 years really forging collaboration that extends past the extent of this fellowship. And I think my practitioner mentors wrote the same thing in their letters for me, which to me is part of a conservation outcome, is being able to actually maintain longevity in any sort of approach you want to give.
And I would also add to that I think the recommendation letters are a good opportunity to demonstrate the need for that particular tool. And if it were me reviewing the application, I would say, okay, well, is this a tool that's going to be developed and then just left out there for someone to pick up and go with? Or is this applicant connected to practitioners who say that they need this tool to advance conservation on the ground?
I could add a brief comment to that, if that's okay, Desiree. Yeah, I would say, I mean, I don't work, my project is not aimed at developing any tools, but thinking where I come from, the University of Queensland, and the story of Marksan, I would say absolutely. The influence that Marksan has had around the world on conservation has been tremendous, and it's a conservation tool for conservation planning. So definitely, yes, I would say.
Yeah, really quickly, I want to echo what Max said about really do bear in mind that this is a 2-year fellowship, and that it seems really short after finishing a PhD. I chose to do a lot of field work because, probably like many of you, I just wanted to be outside. And it was fun, but what that meant was that at the end of the 2 years, I had a bunch of data, but hadn't written up anything from it. So, if you instead opt to do a 2-year project using existing data or some other strategy, you might, end up a little bit farther along.
That's good advice there. I will add that during my interview process, one of the questions for me was, you proposed a lot. What are you going to do if you can't do it all? So I had to think really carefully about what my answer might be. So we only have enough time for, I think, one more question, but I want to emphasize that please do submit your questions to the chat, because anything that we don't get to during this time period, we're going to still answer these questions for you and post them on social media and on the Conservation Biology website. This last question that I have is about research funds and travel funds. So part of the question is, are there constraints to our research and travel funds? But I'm going to add on to that and say, what's the most exciting thing that you bought with your research funds, or what is the most exciting travel that you did?
SCV conference in Beijing.
Nice. Very cool.
I went to the World Herpetology Congress in New Zealand.
Great.
I bought a sewing machine and several $1,000s worth of window screening to sew some cages for my little tadpoles. That's probably the most exciting thing I had.
Love it.
But Malika, one of the former fellows, she bought a drone with her money, so you can do a lot of great things.
Caitlin up in Maine bought a sort of inflatable canoe boat to get out to her station. So I think.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Kim, do you have anything to add? What was the coolest thing that you got or did with your travel?
So it's not quite as exotic, but I spent a lot of time in Southwest Virginia and the Appalachian Mountains, just interacting with folks who would never normally interact with researchers. So a group of Mennonites, a couple other different, very rural, very conservative private schools that don't teach evolution, but were happy to have me come and give a talk about the evolution of amphibians. So I think, also opportunities to just meet people that you would never normally interact with, who you can learn from also, was really tremendously valuable to me.
Great. So just to add on this at the end for the question about constraints for research and travel, that's a great question that you could email Shonda about, and they can give you more specific information. And I can tell you that there's funds that are set aside for research and funds that are set aside for travel, but they're interchangeable depending on what you need, because the funding that you're given in this fellowship is to really lift you up as a researcher. So if you need more travel or need more research, there's a lot of flexibility with that, which is very awesome. So that is all the time that we have today. But before we leave you, Max just has a brief announcement that he wants to make about something coming up soon. Could you do that, Max?
Sure, and I'll actually let Kim pop on if she wants to, because she's actually one of the co-organizers of it. The NACCB meeting kicks off on Monday, and we're opening up with a plenary titled New Paradigm of High Impact Research, Why Conservation Needs to Prioritize Racial and Social Justice. It's going to be a really great panel, starting off with Carolyn Finney giving a nice keynote, a number of small talks, and then a really great discussion afterwards on the role of conservation with racial and social justice. So tune in. If you're not going to be part of the NACCB meeting, the plenary will be posted online for free afterwards, so you can still catch up on all the talks and discussion after the fact.
And let me quickly add two things. The open access version is going to be on YouTube, and the times on this slide are in Mountain Time, which if you live outside Mountain Time, you forget that it's a real time zone.
Thanks, Kara.
3 o'clock Central, 4 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Pacific time.
Great. Thanks for that clarification. And I really just encourage everybody to go to this, because this is a really critical and important conversation to have. So if you have questions that you want to propose to the panelists, please email them to Max. So for everyone that attended this webinar, thank you so much for attending. Thank you for your interest and your patience. I hope that you got some additional information to help you with your fellowship. If you have more questions, submit them to the